How does this?
Good morning.
Got to clip that somewhere.
I'll hold it. There's nowhere to clip it,
Okay.
but since the computer's there, I'll come here. That was a terrifying moment to talk into a camera. Like I was talking to a wall or something. I was always one in school to be over-prepared. And this calling on to be first today reminds me of something that happened a few weeks ago, actually about a month ago, when the minister, where I was associate minister, called at 5 to 11 and said he was not able to make it. I was not prepared at all. That was a good experience. It was graduation for me. So I would like to begin with a quote from an unlikely source. And he says, "My point, once again, is not that those ancient people told literal stories, and now we are smart enough to take them symbolically, but that they told them symbolically, and we are now dumb enough to take them literally." That's John Dominic Crossan. And that speaks to perhaps how imprisoned we have become in our intellect, to the point where we can't appreciate or even recognize that simple, childlike awareness from where revelation actually comes. I have heard recently people say, I'm not interested in the Old Testament. It's too negative. Is that an example of how we take things literally? And those allegories at the beginning of Genesis, oh, that's just Sunday school material for children. Oh, we miss so many rich gems. The Bible is so rich, you will never run out of material. It's a lifelong journey, the Bible. Perhaps we've forgotten the words of Jesus, who said, "You have to become as a little child to enter the kingdom of heaven." So our task, perhaps individually, is to, how do we regain that kingdom that was lost? Well, the Bible's full of instructions, Old Testament, New Testament. Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." The I of me is that presence of God. Isaiah 30, "In returning and rest, you shall be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength." And then Jesus, Mark 1:15, the entire message of Jesus in a capsule. "The time is fulfilled. The kingdom of God is at hand," right here, right now. "Repent." Repent in Aramaic means turn back to God and believe in the gospel. The good news. The good news is that the kingdom of God is within you. Oh, there's many more. Even in one of the Gospels that didn't make the cut, the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene is asking Jesus, where do I find you? And she says, do I find you in the soul or in the spirit? And Jesus says, neither the soul nor the spirit, but in that still point, in between the flesh and the fleshless, not coming from or going toward that still point within us. And that's usually what it's called. Sometimes we call it the silence. In any case, there's plenty of instruction, but those instructions are words. And it's not words that we want. We have a lot of words, but we need a direct experience. A direct experience of the power and presence of God. I know I could ask everyone in this room and everyone in Unity if they believed in one power, one presence, one life, one mind, that we are one with that one, and everyone would say, yes, I believe that. But for that to become a reality for us as a direct experience, that is what, out of which metaphysical interpretation comes. I have to tell you, I never read the Bible until I came to Unity. It was a dusty shelf that my parents never read either, but it was there. But one thing I did, and I feel blessed for having done this, is I learned a practice of silent meditation. And by the time I had gotten to Unity, and I had really good Bible teachers, my first one, Lafayette Seymour, and I realized that I understood the Bible. But it was because of the experience I had had that had cultivated that capacity to see beyond words to the truth. All spiritual teachers are faced with the same difficulty of trying to convey a spiritual experience to those who have not experienced it. And so we say, well, it's like this. Jesus told parables. The prophets spoke in symbols and images. That's why I call metaphysics the language of the soul. The soul doesn't speak English. You can't learn it. You can't learn metaphysics from a book or go to Rosetta Stone. It unfolds, and the deeper you get into the silence, the more, more profound your interpretation becomes. Excuse me. Myrtle Fillmore was a mystic from childhood. If you read one of her biographies, it talks about her childhood experiences of being one with nature, 5 years old. And she would find herself with tuberculosis, but being one with the trees and actually being out of her body, looking at herself. And recognizing that during that time, she was free from pain. Those experiences left a memory impression, so that when she went to that now famous lecture in 1886 and heard the words, "I'm a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness," she had prepared that rich soil, in which that affirmation penetrated to the soul of her being to the point where she took action on it immediately, never looked back, never wavered, never got tuberculosis and any recurrence of that or illness. And that was the beginning of unity, that mystical experience. We don't usually start our history of unity in 1886. It began as a child of having that experience, and she later, when she could put words to it, said, that was my first experience of the omnipresence of God. That led to not only her own healing, it led to her desire to share that with others. She announced her own healing. Word spread through Kansas City, and as I was reading through old Unity material, I found that there was a Kansas City Star article of a woman who had been down to 9th and Tracy and said people were coming from all over the United States and all over the world. I did not know that, and considered 9th and Tracy the greatest healing center in the world. That's our legacy. But we have to know the truth, not know about the truth. I don't know, Mark, I think this means trouble. And so that's why the groups of silent unity were formed. Little groups here and there, sitting in silent meditation. And from 6 in the Fillmore's living room, it grew to 200,000 groups around the world, all sitting in silence. So, and given the difference in time zones, that meant there was continuous silent prayer around the world. Evie Ingraham, one of our old-time teachers in the correspondence school, said, silence is unity's simplest and most advanced practice, most advanced subject. The first course in Series 1 of the correspondence material was called Silence. It was later changed to prayer, but prayer was silence. And then the affirmation was from a place of silence, where the affirmation is actually true, a reality for you. And so, unity is a mystical teaching. The teachings of Jesus are mystical teachings, that is, know your oneness with the power and presence of God. And unity, in my opinion, has more in common with the mystical traditions of other religions than it does with the denominations of Christianity. There's a Bible scholar by name of Michael Segru from Princeton. Ooh.
I think it'll be all right. Just let it be.
And Michael Segru said, the Bible is all music and no noise. All music, no noise. When we come to have an experience, even a little taste of that silence, that's when we realize that the Bible is actually within us. That all those characters in the Bible, and here I thank Laura for my most fun Bible assignment in school, to take a Bible character and relate that Bible character to your own experience. And I was Elijah. The only criticism I got was that it was way too long, but I couldn't quit writing about it. And those Bible characters come alive, and you realize they're not separate people. You know, there's a Judas in there, and there's a Pharisee in there, and all the people aren't people. And the places aren't places. And so if a character goes from Jerusalem to Jericho, that's not going 2 miles or whatever, but it's moving from one state of consciousness to another. And numbers are not amounts. Michael Segru, that I was just mentioning, wrote a 30-page treatise on the number 153, which occurs once in the Bible. It occurs at one point. It's a post-resurrection experience. It's how many fish the disciples caught when they cast their nets on the right side of the boat. And it's really fun for me to look at those numbers because they have a meaning. He said every chapter, every verse. If you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So metaphysics is an ongoing, fascinating, rich study. The question, I think, for some of us is, how do we build a ministry around this? And up until the 4th of July, and this was symbolic, intentionally, I resigned my position. He was another one of my great Bible teachers, Greg Nettler. I resigned my position to focus my attention on an educational ministry, which I call New Foundation Unity. And I discovered in the course of wanting to do this, and partly because of the IMU conference during the summer, I discovered a piece of unity literature that no minister I talked to had ever heard of. But I found a reference to it in a footnote in one of Neil Volley's books, and I went to the archivist. He'd never heard of it either, but he looked until he found it, and it's called Methods and Ideals: How to Incorporate the foundational principles of unity into a ministry. And it wasn't easy, even in those days, to do that. There were complaints coming into Unity headquarters. These centers, when people started going out, there weren't churches in those days. They were called centers, and people were going out, and reports were coming back. They're not teaching unity. That doesn't sound like unity. And in response to that, Charles Fillmore wrote, with the help of E.V. Ingraham, methods and ideals. The methods that you use to teach should match the ideals that you hold. So the ideal of unity, one power, one presence, know your oneness with all life. And so at the beginning of every class and at the end of every class, 15 minutes of silence. I once asked one of my teachers, what happened to that? And she said, oh, people's attention span is only 12 seconds. They don't know what to do in the silence. And so that's what I consider the new foundation, is to begin again with the practice of silence. And out of that comes that language of the soul. It's a natural language. We all speak it. But we don't know that we speak it until we get to that consciousness where the authors were when they wrote the passages in the Bible. But there's no way you can use ordinary language to do that. And so we realize that we are metaphysicians. We are. And there's no end to the depth of understanding we can have. Consider the Bible as the spiritual history of the whole human race, and that every single thing you read in the Bible validates your experience, whatever it is, be it a challenge, be it a joy, it's there. And it will serve you as wisdom. But it also validates you're on the right track. You know, this character had the experience. Have I ever betrayed my own values? Judas, that's Judas. We've got a Judas. Have I ever said there's only one way to do it and this is the way and you have to come to... That's a Pharisee. All right? And so we begin to see where our inner work lies. And we begin to cast out those demons, as Jesus did for Mary Magdalene. You know, the 7 demons. So her energy centers were completely purified. And we have those demons too. They're usually equivalent to the 7 deadly sins. And so that's where I'm headed with my ministry. I'm incorporating a lot of methods and ideals. And as was said earlier, and tailoring them to the circumstances of today. But silence and metaphysical interpretation are things that don't change. They're a very necessary tool for our journey. And there's another piece here. Which is, I think we have to take into consideration the time in which we are living. That because there is more light coming onto the planet, and has been ever since the time of Jesus' ascension. And you may or may not know that Charles Fillmore believed that when Jesus ascended, that the electrons of his purified body went out into the ethers, creating access for us into that fourth dimension of consciousness. And so the light kind of poked a hole into that encrusted human sense of limitation, allowing light to come onto our planet more and more. That's why we can easily go into the silence. Whereas in Jesus' time, it took a laser beam consciousness that he had to poke through that. But he didn't come to say, look how great I am. Look, I can show off. He said, I'm here to tell you that you can do this too, and here's how you do it. And so for the past 2,000 years, this light has been coming onto the planet, and we need to have been preparing for it, creating the conditions in consciousness that will allow us to accommodate that increasingly full blast of light. And Charles Fillmore said, he predicted this would happen, that we would have violence, we would have all the dark things that we see happening right now. And he said, but these little groups, silent unity groups around the world, they will be like the disciplined army of the Lord, and will radiate out the peace that will quell the violence. He was a visionary. I think of the vision that he had, which he called the Unity Church. Excuse me. I get choked up when I think of this. The Unity Church Universal. That was not a building. It's not the building at 9th and Tracy. It is the universal church of Christ. That when the collective, 2 or 3, but the whole collective, a certain number, all together. And you've probably noticed that when a group of you meditates together, sits in silence together, the coherence is increased greatly. And then that radiates out and influences your environment. So the vision of the Unity Church Universal was to fulfill the ideal of Jesus, which was the brotherhood of man. I mean, when I read this, he actually believed it. He said, but it's not going to happen in my time. We are not yet ready. And when he announced it, this was 1924. When he had the revelation, like the prophets of old, he said, and the name Unity came to him. That's when he had the revelation of the Unity Church Universal, the way to fulfill the ideal of Jesus. And Jesus was there to fulfill God's desire to fully incarnate in a human form. So consider in the large context, we're at the end of an age where the age of Pisces is becoming the age of Aquarius, and there is this global chemicalization going on. And what can we do? We can tend to our own spiritual practice. And hold fast to the truth that really there is no condition, no situation, nothing that is too big to be solved or healed. Think big, because those bigger thoughts have more chance of being fulfilled than the small ones, because they're closer to the source. And this is another Charles Fillmore. Everything else besides this journey fades into insignificance beside the one of getting, can't read my writing, in getting more into the consciousness of oneness with the Father. And our true prayer becomes one of rejoicing and celebration. I want to leave about 10 minutes or so if you have any comments or if you have any questions, or anyway, because I really do like to interact with people. So it was amazing. I've been reading T.S. Eliot. You know, when you once hit on an idea, then you begin to see it everywhere that you look. And so I opened T.S. Eliot. This was from the Four Quartets. And he said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So, yes, we're already one with God, but we have to go through the journey of becoming conscious of that reality. Yes?
Reverend Fleming, you mentioned the number 153.
Yes.
Spoken once in the Bible.
Yes.
Would you explain a little?
Would you?
I have some ideas about what I think.
Okay.
Such a unique number once.
Yes.
I don't think you should just.
Okay. All right, first the setting. All right, we're in the post-resurrection experience. And the disciples have gone back to fishing. They've gone back to their old life. Right? And they've been fishing all night and caught nothing. And then Peter and John, they catch a vision of Jesus on the shore. And he says, "Children, cast your nets on the right side." Now, apparently, they had been fishing on the left side. All right. All right. We can even interpret left and right if you want. And so as a result of that, they caught a load of fish, 153. Well, now you know they didn't sit there counting 1, 2, 3. One always references the divine. There are some numbers that always represent. And the one is one of them, all right? One, wholeness, oneness, unity. All right. 5, what do we have 5 of? Senses, fingers, toes, all right? 3 represents the Trinity, all right? Everything expresses and manifests through a Trinity. So what happened was they caught 153 fish. So when all 3 aspects of spirit, oneness, all right, soul, and body, when they're all functioning together, What a bounty of fish. It's all there. We can manifest anything. All right? If we are in that consciousness of oneness, that activates the Trinity, which brings forth into manifestation that which we need. And fish represent ideas. Okay? What we need is ideas. We don't need physical food. We need spiritual food. It's ideas that we need to manifest into what it is that we need. There's much more. 30 pages, Michael Segru. He could do it much more thoroughly than I just did. But just know that numbers are meaningful. I had fun once in a class telling the students to look at the number 40. All right? Look at the number 40. And every time you see 40, meaning as much time as it takes to establish a foundation, 4 square, on the earth, as much time as is needed for that to happen. So, Moses, 40 years in each phase of his life. He was 40 years in the wilderness. Oh, Jesus was 40 days. All right. And the Israelites as a whole, 40 years in the wilderness, however long it took to get to the point of that particular mission. And then, 40 days, the flood, 40 days and 40 nights, all right, until everything was purified. So it's fun. You can do that. You can pick 7, or you can pick 12. 7, the number of manifestation, that number of fulfillment in a physical or material sense, and 12, the number of complete fulfillment in the book of Revelation. You see these numbers shifting from 7 to 12. It's all significant. And it's fascinating. It's not a mere intellectual exercise, but it gives you a sense of how the only way to convey that type of experience is through an understanding that comes from a consciousness where these authors were when they wrote it. You know, and it's amazing that that from Genesis to Revelation, even though it was put together in what would appear to be random order, it turns out that it's a perfect order. You know, there was some spirit, some divine intervention there that organized things. And so the exact middle of the Bible, this was something I just discovered on my own, that the exact middle of the Bible is Psalm, let's see if I can remember which Psalm it was, 118, I believe. And that there are an odd number of verses there, so that it worked out to be 13, in between 13 and 14. Silence. Silence. There was a half hour of silence in the book of Revelation before the 7th seal. Anyway, a long answer to a short question, but there's even a more thorough explanation. So you always want to fish on the right side. Yes?
When you're meditating in the silence, are you trying to keep your mind blank, or are you becoming increasingly aware of.
And this is why it is so hard for people, because you're not trying to do anything. It's easier, and Myrtle and Charles both use mantras. It is easier with a mantra because a mantra, if it's a traditional mantra, resonates with the source. And so your mind is innocently drawn in the direction that it wants to go. We're have always been looking outward. And so to turn that around, a mantra is a helpful tool. Children do it quite naturally. But adults, we've accumulated all kinds of beliefs about what meditation should be or should not be, and you find everything, including lighting a candle, that's meditation. And it's not about focusing on anything. It's about simply letting go. If I were to say, now I want you to dive into this water, and all you need to do is you need to get up here on this diving board and get in position and then let go. Oh, gravity pulls you in. And it's exactly the force of gravity that pulls the mind in. And the mantra is a very valuable tool. And when you learn a traditional form of meditation, there is an initiation, meaning you are guided into the experience first. And this is why I feel very blessed in having done this and had about 12 years under my belt before getting to Unity, where I heard the whole intellectual superstructure of what it was about. So that's essential, no matter what religion you're in or what teaching you're drawn to. The experience always has to be there to make the teachings real for you. Charles said, my favorite quote of Charles Fillmore, and then I'll tell you Myrtle. My favorite quote of Charles Fillmore is, "The truth you know is the truth you use, and all the rest is theory." Think of that. The truth you know is the truth you use, and all the rest is theory. Now, Myrtle, I said she was a mystic from childhood. And after her healing and after all of the experiences, all the people who had come for healing, after all she had written in the Silent Unity department of Unity magazine, she wrote lots and lots of letters in response. And in one letter, she said this. She was writing to a woman who had a phenomenal, what Myrtle called, mountaintop experience. And she said to this woman, "I'm so glad that you shared that." She said, "Because I have come so close to breaking right through into the wonders of the kingdom. And there are no words to express this. And I have come to the point where I think my role is to simply be, and to behold, and to build, so that when people come into my presence, they see in me a symbol of what they are yearning for." Just to be. Wouldn't that be wonderful if you could simply be in your fullness and radiate light, that people would come and say, "Oh, that's what I want." So that's Myrtle Fillmore, and I know that it's now 10:45, and but I'll talk to you as long as there are questions too. Yes.
I'm starting a news center. We've been in existence about 4 months, and a lot of people I've noticed come because they think New Age. And so when I get out the Bible, I hear all kinds of moans and groans and eye rolling. And,
Yes.
and when I even ask people after the service, they say, I love your sermon except for the Bible part. And because I don't believe in the Bible. That's old stuff. And so I'm just wondering, I think the time I can do something is in my sermon, because I have everyone captive. And I'm just wondering if there's some materials that maybe you would recommend to get people over that hump so they can start seeing it anew like I did.
Recently I was teaching an SEE class, and I had 2 people in there who didn't want to be there, but it was required for them to be there. And it was an overview of the Old Testament. And how do you cover everything in 10 hours, 10 lifetimes maybe. And so what I did, and I don't know any materials that tell you how to do it except to know the excitement of it yourself and transmit it that way. So what I did with these people, this one had been in Unity less than 3 years. And the other one was from religious science, and she didn't like the Bible. But they had to take it, and I was the teacher. So what I did to the one who thought that there was nothing in the Old Testament, absolutely nothing, I just started picking my favorite stories, and I happened to land on one that struck her fancy. The story of the spies going into the promised land. And it's a story in Numbers. It's not one that is probably very familiar to people, but and how 2 of them came back and they saw huge fruits. Grapes so big, it took 2 men to carry one cluster of grapes. But the other 10 came back and they said, yeah, we saw those fruits, but they were giants. And the more they talked about it, the giants were then devouring their people, and we were like grasshoppers, and here's what would happen. These giants would step on us like grasshoppers. Well, I told us, because I love that story. It's like we do this all the time. We make the obstacles bigger than the... And this woman, when she wrote her paper at the end, she told me her whole story and how she had sabotaged so many things because she had made the obstacles. Another thing you can do is just tell a personal story. People relate to that a lot. You say, this has happened to me. I went to check out something I really wanted to do, and wow, did it look enticing. And then I thought, I'm too old, I'm not smart enough. No, you can do that. But the stories in themselves are so good. They're so good. And so I just did that for the whole time, because you can't fill them with all the information about they will go to sleep. But yes. But it's not to know about the Bible, it's to know the Bible as your own story. So I think you share your excitement and share a couple of personal experiences that demonstrate how you have used it, and somebody will catch on. And, like Tom said in the beginning, that every once in a while it will click. And it really clicked when I wrote a paper on Elijah. I just saw, when you really see yourself in a story, you say, oh, not only is Elijah here, but Jezebel is there too. Yes.
Yes, I formally apologize for that criticism. I have since written 40-page term papers myself.
Yes. But you only asked for 15, and I was up to 20, and you had to read them all. Yes. But I also had, a wonderful, besides Laura being excited about the Bible, I had the handouts from her father, Paul Barrett, and I have saved all of those, I have to say. A wonderful Bible metaphysician. Yes. And then Greg Nettler, whom I thought, knew every part of the Bible. And then that day came when I had 5 minutes and went to the computer and saw he had all these Bible passages on the computer that he was going to talk about. That saved me. You can always talk about the Bible. You don't have to think of a whole big talk. Anything else? If not, I'll give you.
One last thing, I don't think we should. I would like to mention what I got from when you mentioned about Michael Seabrook.
Yes. I think this is right. Sagrue. I think that's how you spell it.
The point I'm making is the Bible is alive. It's a living book. You mentioned some points that really touched me where the Judas is in me, this is me. So when we can realize that the Judas is in you, Peter is in you, and all of that, people will go to sleep on you.
Well, exactly. Exactly, but you see, if people think of it in human consciousness, Judas is a bad guy and Jesus is a good guy. We have approached the Bible from a consciousness of duality. And you can't get into a state of oneness where the revelation comes from approaching it from the outside. Then you're trying to pound your way into the kingdom. It can't be done. So you realize that there's all these parts of you. It's one integrated landscape of consciousness. We have to have all possibilities. So yes, we do have a Judas inside of us. How many times have you sold out for some perceived personal gain? I mean, we do it all the time. People sell themselves to a job that they hate for the money, I mean, we see all kinds of acts of betrayal by our life experiences. Judas represents that faculty of life. And, and he's been put on the lowest rung of hell. But, and I just caught a glimpse of Judas there at the door that Don Rogers used to play Judas in. He was Judas in our Christmas. Okay, so I'm supposed to quit now and give you a 5-minute break, but I'll be around for the day. And so thank you all, and God bless you.